"You don't belong in this family," she said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. It was my late husband's birthday, the first one since he passed. I had baked his favorite pie, the one he used to request every year since our second anniversary. I didn't come to make a scene. I didn't come to take space. I came to remember him, quietly. But quiet wasn't welcome anymore. Her voice cut through the dining room like a blade wrapped in lace. My sister-in-law, Cheryl, always careful with appearances but never with cruelty, was staring at me like I'd shown up uninvited to my own life. "You still think you belong here?" she said again, softer this time, but sharper. I blinked. My hands were still on the dish towel, wiping off a fingerprint from the pie plate like it mattered. This was his home, too. Cheryl didn't flinch. "But he's gone, and so is your place." No one said a word, not even my son. He sat across from me, eyes locked on his water glass. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Just silence. It was all so fast. One moment, I was setting the pie on the table like I had for 27 years. The next, I was a stranger with a dessert. The others avoided my eyes. A few shifted awkwardly. One of my nieces gave me a pitiful look and quickly looked away. And just like that, I understood. This wasn't about pie. This was about erasing. Erasing my seat at this table. Erasing the years I stood beside my husband through every family crisis. Erasing the woman who held his hand through chemo. Erasing the only one who still remembered how he liked his coffee. But the thing about grief, real grief, is that it sharpens you. It burns away all illusions. I looked at Cheryl, looked past the pearls and perfect smile, and I saw it. The hunger for control. The ambition dressed up in tradition. She wanted to be the matriarch now, and I was in the way. I smoothed the edge of the tablecloth. My hands were steady. "He asked me to be here," I said. She tilted her head. "He's not here to ask any more." That's when I knew. This wasn't just a bad dinner. This was war. And she had no idea what I still carried. Because before he died, my husband left me something. Not just memories, but proof. Proof that I didn't just belong in this family. I was the reason it was still standing. She wanted a quiet exit, but I had something louder than words. Something she couldn't smile her way out of. And it was sitting, unopened, in the drawer by my bed. Friends, let me take a short pause. Would you mind writing in the comments? Where are you listening from? Have you ever gone through something similar in your own life? If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and sharing it. It's the best way to help us grow this channel and keep telling stories that matter. All right, let's continue. The laughter in the dining room faded into the clinking of glasses and the quiet scrape of forks. But behind the kitchen door, a different kind of conversation began. I hadn't meant to overhear. I'd stepped away to bring out more napkins, to catch my breath, to find a moment where the grief didn't sit so loud in my chest. But then I heard my name, not spoken, but dismissed. "She was never really one of us," one voice said. It was low, but not low enough. I knew that tone, the kind that curls around truth and strangles it. Another voice followed. "She only married him to climb. She knew exactly what she was doing, latching onto a family with status." And then the final whisper, the one that gutted me more than I expected. "She's still clinging to a name that isn't even hers anymore." I stood frozen, my hand still resting on the linen drawer, my breath caught between inhale and disbelief. I wasn't shocked by what they said. No, not anymore. But it was the ease of it that stung, the casual cruelty, the way they spoke like I was an old photo, one they'd grown tired of seeing on the wall. They didn't know I was there. They didn't care. 27 years of holidays, hospital visits, birthdays, and late-night family emergencies, reduced to a strategic marriage, as if love could be faked through chemo, as if climbing was the goal when I held his hand through his last breath. I didn't move. I didn't cry. There was no dramatic gasp or trembling collapse. Just silence, and something inside me cracking. Not from pain this time, but from clarity. Because in that moment, I finally understood. This was never about me being too emotional, too attached, too present. It was about them needing me gone. I was a mirror they didn't want to look into, proof of what real loyalty looked like, real grief, real love. They wanted to erase me, not because I didn't belong, but because I reminded them who really did. And maybe once upon a time I would have begged to stay. I would have tried to prove my worth with kindness, with patience, with perfectly cut slices of pie and thank you notes. But not anymore. Let them whisper. Let them rewrite stories in rooms I no longer entered. Because in a drawer beside my bed, folded carefully in the envelope he sealed himself, was the one truth no whisper could undo. And I was no longer afraid to open it. After the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat in the empty living room, surrounded by dishes that still smelled like warmth, and memories I no longer felt welcome to claim. The couch where he used to nap was still indented slightly, like his presence hadn't quite faded. I ran my hand across the back of it. Slow, quiet, like trying not to wake a ghost. And in that stillness, a memory surfaced. It was from his last week. His voice was thinner than usual, barely above a whisper, but his eyes were clear, almost too clear. He reached for my hand, placed a small sealed envelope into it, and closed my fingers around it with both of his. "Not yet," he had said. "They'll show you when it's time." At the time, I thought it was grief talking, the way people speak in riddles when they know they're running out of air. I didn't ask questions. I just held the envelope, nodded, and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed, where the letters from our first year of marriage still lived, yellowed and soft at the edges. I never opened it. I didn't want to. It felt sacred, final, like breaking a seal on something too fragile to touch without consequence. But tonight I finally understood. The timing he spoke of wasn't marked by calendar dates or anniversaries. It was marked by betrayal. They thought they had read everything, every paper, every trust, every detail he left behind. They split responsibilities like assets, cold, efficient, smug in their assumption that everything valuable had been handed to them. They thought legacy lived in signatures and documents. But what he left me wasn't meant for courtrooms or accountants. It was meant for this, for the moment they tried to tell me I didn't exist. So I walked upstairs, slowly. The silence in the hallway pressed against me like a warning, but I didn't pause. I opened the drawer, second one from the top, the same one I had avoided for months. The envelope was still there, cream-colored, heavy, untouched. I sat on the edge of the bed, ran my thumb across the seam. My heart beat so loud I could feel it in my fingertips. And then I opened it. Inside were two things. A handwritten letter, his handwriting, unmistakable, still steady even in his final days. And behind it, a copy of something official, with a seal. The kind of paper that rewrote things, not with noise, but with power. I didn't cry, I didn't gasp. I just read it, once, twice. And then I closed my eyes, not from pain but from peace. Because he hadn't just left me a letter. He left me my place, and the permission to claim it, when the time came. The time was now. The next gathering came faster than I expected. A family dinner, they said. Just the usual. A way to keep traditions alive. But I felt the shift the moment I walked in, not in words, but in the way chairs were angled, the way conversations paused as I stepped through the door, the way my name wasn't mentioned. Not once. I brought nothing this time. No pie, no warm smile. I brought only presents, and the envelope now locked in the top drawer of my desk. I told myself I'd just sit through it. Be civil. Let them have their evening, their performance of unity. But deep down, I knew Cheryl wouldn't leave it alone. She never did. Dinner was already halfway through when it happened. She stood, not dramatically, but with the kind of elegance that demands attention. She raised her glass, that fake smile plastered across her face like a carefully painted mask. "I just want to say how lovely it is," she began, eyes scanning the table, "to keep our family traditions strong. It's what he would have wanted. Togetherness, loyalty, a sense of true belonging." There was something venomous in the sweetness of her voice. Everyone felt it, but no one dared to interrupt. She continued, tone light, but blade sharp. "And I think, moving forward, it would be lovely to keep these dinners family only." She paused, let it hang, let it sink in. No need for outsiders to linger in our traditions. My breath caught, but I kept my posture still. dignified, unmoved. She didn't stop there. She turned, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at me. I'm sure you understand. The silence that followed was the kind that bruises. No one defended me. No one challenged her. Forks touched plates. Glasses shifted. But not a single voice rose in protest. And in that moment, I realized what this was. Not just exclusion. Not just humiliation. This was her attempt to make it official. To declare my erasure in front of everyone. To mark the line between us and her. She wanted to steal the very air from the room and watch me suffocate. And the saddest part, some of them let her. Even the ones who used to call me sister. Even my son, who looked down again, pretending to inspect his drink. But I didn't flinch. I didn't break. Because Cheryl thought this was the final act. What she didn't know was that the curtain hadn't even risen yet. Let her toast to her illusion of power. Let her build a throne on silence and smirks. I had no intention of fighting her with words. I had something better, and soon so would everyone else. I turned to him, my son, the boy I raised into a man. The one who once clung to my leg on his first day of school, who used to run to me with scraped knees and trembling lips, whispering, "Don't tell Dad," I cried. The one I stayed awake for on long nights when he was sick, when his world felt too big and he needed mine to feel small and safe. He didn't meet my eyes, not during Cheryl's speech, not after. Not when the words "outsider" echoed like gunshots in my chest. He simply stared down at his plate, his fork untouched, his hand still, like a child pretending the storm isn't happening if he just keeps still enough. I waited, maybe just a glance, a shift in his seat, a clearing of the throat, anything to tell me he saw it, that he felt what was being done to me. But he said nothing, and in that nothing I heard everything. There was a moment, brief, sharp, where I thought about calling his name out loud, about breaking the silence, forcing him to choose, to stand up, to say something. But what would that have accomplished? A confrontation? A scene? Number? That wasn't what my husband raised me for. That wasn't the woman he fell in love with. The woman who held her head high even when the world whispered she didn't belong. Still, it hurt. It hurt more than Cheryl's words, more than the whispers behind the kitchen door. It hurt in a way only silence can. A betrayal without fingerprints, a wound without a weapon. Because it wasn't about loyalty anymore. It was about memory. And in that moment, I realized he had forgotten. Forgotten the nights I went without so he could have. Forgotten the birthdays I planned alone, the school forms I signed, the quiet mornings when his father was too tired and it was just me making life move forward. Forgotten who held the family together when illness came like a thief and took the laughter from our house. And maybe he thought he was being neutral. Maybe he believed silence was safer. But silence is never neutral. Silence is a choice. And he chose her comfort over my dignity. I didn't cry. Not there, not then. Instead, I looked down at my own hands. Hands that had done more for this family than half the people at that table combined. Hands that knew sacrifice and service. Hands that once held his when he was too afraid to sleep after nightmares. And I reminded myself, grief doesn't only come after death. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a look not given, in a defense not made, in the sound of your own child pretending you're not breaking. But grief also teaches. It taught me to stop asking for a seat I had already earned, to stop explaining my worth to people who were too afraid to admit they owed me more than they ever said, to stop waiting for my son to speak, and instead to prepare for the moment when truth would. Because truth was coming, in black ink, on white paper, in the words of the man who built this family, and chose me to protect it when he no longer could. And that truth would be louder than any silence my son gave me. I slipped into my bedroom long after the lights in the rest of the house had gone out. The hallway was dark, save for the faint glow of the moon through the sheer curtains. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. I opened the wardrobe and began pulling things off the hangers. Not dresses or casual shirts. I chose the pieces I knew he loved. The blue blouse he once said matched the color of the sky on our wedding day. The jacket he used to wrap around me during our walks in autumn. Each fold carried the echo of his laughter, the soft brush of his hand. Next, I went to the dresser drawer, where I kept the relics of our life together. I lifted out the framed wedding photo, the one where we stood under the arch of white roses, our smiles bright and eyes full of promise. Gently, I wrapped it in a soft cloth, feeling the glass tremble beneath my fingers. Then I found the yellowed letter from his deployment, his neat cursive telling me how every sunrise on that distant desert felt empty without the promise of coming home to me. My chest tightened. I'd read it so many times I could recite it by heart, but tonight its words felt sharper, more urgent. Underneath, taped to the back of our third anniversary card, was the pressed flower he'd picked from a meadow near his childhood home. The petals were brittle now, a pale ghost of the vibrant bloom they once were. I held it as if it were an ember, careful not to let it break apart in my hands. I moved to the bedside table and retrieved the sealed envelope, his last gift to me, the one he urged me not to open until I needed it most. My fingers hesitated at the seal. For months it had been both comfort and burden, a promise of justice I wasn't yet ready to fulfill. Now it was a key to reclaiming everything I had nearly lost. Box by box, I packed these memories, everything that bore witness to our life together, into a sturdy trunk. There was no note, no announcement, no declaration of departure, only the silent resolve that if this family refused to keep me, I would carry him and our history with me wherever I went. Halfway through, my son's face flickered behind my closed eyelids. I remembered his small hand clutched in mine at the airport when he was 5. I remembered reading bedtime stories to him when his father was away. I remembered the quiet promise in his eyes that we were a team. And I grieved not just for the man I lost, but for the boy I feared I was losing too. But grief also carried determination. With each item I wrapped, I felt something strengthen inside me, a clarity born from heartbreak. These were not mere belongings. They were my testament, my proof that love had built this family long before any whispered doubts. That loyalty ran deeper than blood. When the trunk finally stood closed at the foot of my bed, its lid latched tight, I took a breath and let it out slowly, like exhaling the last of a dream. I kissed the top of the box, as if blessing it, and whispered into the dark, "I'm ready." Because I wasn't running away, I was gathering strength, and soon, very soon, the truth he left me would arrive, and no one would be able to deny where I belonged. The envelope felt heavier than I remembered, as if every memory it held weighed on the paper itself. I carried it back to the bedroom, the moonlight now muted behind the gathering clouds. Standing before the mirror, I saw a stranger's reflection, eyes rimmed with fatigue, shoulders squared against a world that had tried to erase me. My fingers trembled as I peeled back the seal, the soft crack echoing in the hush of the room. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, his handwriting unfolding across the page like a promise. Every loop and stroke reminded me of the mornings he gently roused me with. The paper trembled in my grip as I unfolded it fully, revealing not a scatter of words born from the heart, but the sure hand of legal authority. This was no simple love note. Every sentence carried the weight of ink pressed behind a notary's seal, the kind that binds more than hearts, it binds legacies. My eyes traced the lines, "I, Robert Langley, hereby designate my beloved wife, Elizabeth Langley, as the permanent custodian of all family heritage, assets, and legacy, effective immediately and in perpetuity." My breath hitched. My fingers felt the imprint of the pen where he had applied extra pressure, as if to ensure no one could ever claim otherwise. "Because she is not just my wife," the next line read, "she is the root from which this tree still stands. Without her devotion, this family would have withered long before my final days." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the seal of the document catching the moonlight. It shone not just with authority, but with proof that love in his eyes had translated into trust and unbreakable responsibility. Tears pricked behind my eyelids, but I didn't let them fall. This was not a moment for tears, it was a moment for reckoning. In that stillness, I felt the air shift around me. No whispered doubts, no cruel declarations, No stolen traditions could erase the power of his words. The heritage he spoke of, the stories, the heirlooms, the very name, were mine to protect. And with that realization, something inside me ignited. A calm, fierce resolve took root. I would rise not as a victim of their cruelty, but as the rightful guardian of everything he entrusted to me. I stood, the letter clutched to my chest, and whispered into the darkness, I accept this duty, because from this moment on, no one would ever doubt where I belonged again. I returned to the dining room with the letter hidden in the pocket of my coat. The chandeliers cast soft halos over the polished table, but the mood was colder than the autumn air outside. I placed my napkin on my lap and folded my hands together, as if I belonged there, because I did. Cheryl's eyes snapped to me, narrow and incredulous. I thought we agreed, she began, voice low and furious. But I held up a hand, the simplest gesture of control, and she fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. The silverware gleamed, untouched. The waiting hush pressed against my shoulders like a demand. And then, with a calm I barely recognized in myself, I reached into my coat and withdrew the folded parchment. They watched as I unfolded it, slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of its meaning settle over the table like a promise. My fingers traced the embossed seal, the official stamp of notary, the unmistakable signature at the bottom. Because she is not just my wife, I began, voice steady. He named me permanent custodian of everything he built. I slid the letter across the glass surface, watching it glide toward Cheryl. Her smirk died, her breath caught. The others leaned forward, curiosity and shock lighting their faces. My son's eyes found mine for the first time in days, wide and uncertain. My husband's brother pushed his chair back, the scrape echoing louder than any accusation. Cheryl reached out, trembling slightly, and picked up the letter. Her face paled as she read, line by line, the declaration that stripped away every whispered insult, every calculated exclusion. No one could argue with ink and seal. No one could deny the truth when it was written in his own hand. The room held its breath until Cheryl finally raised her eyes to mine. I didn't see triumph or apology, only the dawning realization that she had underestimated me. I folded my hands again and leaned back in my chair, the tension drained from my shoulders, replaced by something purer, justice. Tonight, the patriarchy she built on whispers and alliances had crumbled under the weight of one letter. And as I sat there, reclaimed by the life we built together, I felt the first stirrings of peace bloom inside me. Because they had tried to erase me, but he made sure they could never succeed. One by one, they picked up the letter, their faces shifting as each line unfolded the truth they'd tried to bury. My son read first, his brow furrowed, shoulders tightening as he traced my husband's elegant script. I watched his lips part, as if he wanted to mumble a defense for me, but the words got caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, the tension in his jaw betraying the storm he'd been holding back. Next came my brother-in-law, the man whose laugh once echoed in this room with fondness. He sat straighter, eyes dark with regret, reading the declaration aloud in his mind. I could see the weight settling on him like a condemnation, decades of assumptions unraveling in the crisp black ink. And then Cheryl. She held the letter at arm's length, as if its power might leap from the page. The smug confidence that had been her armor cracked the moment she met my gaze. Her lips parted, but no retort emerged. Instead, her hands began to tremble, the paper wrinkling beneath her fingers. "This isn't legal," she whispered, voice pitched between disbelief and denial. Her denial felt hollow against the binding seal and notarized statement. Yet even as she spoke, she knew the truth outweighed her words. Her eyes darted around the table, searching for allies in a sea of stunned faces, but there were none. My son lifted his gaze, and for the first time that night, he met my eyes. His expression was raw, shame, guilt, and something like awe all mingled together. He closed his mouth, swallowed again, then slowly set the letter down, the sound echoing like a gavel's strike. The room felt impossible still, the kind of still that follows a revelation too bright, to ignore. I drew in a quiet breath, savoring the moment. This was the pivot, where whispers met permanence, where secrets bowed to courage. Cheryl's unsteady breath filled the silence. She looked at the notary's seal as though hoping it would vanish if she stared hard enough. But seals don't lie. Paper doesn't forget. Ink doesn't fade under truth's gaze. I realized she was mourning something far deeper than her lost control. She was mourning her illusions about power and family, the illusions that had given her the right to cast me out. I reached across the table, but didn't touch her hand. Instead, I said softly, "It is legal." She didn't answer. She couldn't. So I stood, lifting my chair slightly and setting it aside. The sound was quiet, but undeniable. "I will always belong here," I said, voice firm, because he made it so. The air shifted, and with it, the last remnants of doubt scattered. In their place rose something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. And as I walked away from the table, I knew the hardest chapter was over, and the rest would be about rebuilding what love had created. My son rose as though summoned by a force he could no longer resist. The air trembled around him, the kind of silence that precedes a confession. His shoulders were tense, hands curled into fists at his sides, and I could see the storm of emotion in his eyes. Regret, love, and something like relief. He took a breath so deep it sounded like he was drawing in the weight of every unspoken word between us. Then he spoke, not to the tablecloth, not to the gathering, but to me. I was wrong. His voice cracked, the single admission shattering years of hurt and distance. He looked at me with an intensity that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. "She's more family than any of us ever deserved." He said it as if discovering a truth that had been hiding in plain sight, a truth I'd lived but few would acknowledge. The words echoed, and I felt them resonate in my bones. A son proclaiming his mother's worth to a family that had tried to erase her. Then, with the quiet dignity I had prayed for but never demanded, he reached behind him and pulled out a chair. The scrape of its legs against the floor sounded like the unlocking of something in all of us, the release of a wrong that needed setting right. For my mother. He set the chair next to mine, placing it firmly at the table where it had once felt empty beneath me. In that single gesture, he restored what had been taken, our bond, our history, our place in this family. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sorrow, but of fierce, unguarded pride. The proudest moment of my life wasn't the day he graduated or the awards he won. It was this, the day he stood for me when no one else would, when the weight of tradition and prejudice threatened to bury the truth of who I was. Around us, the room exhaled. Forks rested on plates, eyes flickered from him to me, and in those glances I sensed remorse, gratitude, even awe. The fortress they'd built of whispers and exclusion had cracks now, and light seeped through. My son sat, and I reached out, placing my hand over his. Warmth spread through me, a reminder that love, even bruised, never truly dies. It transforms. In that moment, I understood that our story wasn't just about inheritance or titles. It was about the courage to speak when every instinct told you to stay silent. It was about the power of a mother's love breaking through walls built by pride. And as I looked at him, my son, my champion, I knew the legacy my husband entrusted to me would live on in acts of truth like this. The legacy of standing firm, of speaking up, of never letting anyone redefine where you belong. The gathering resumed, but everything had changed. The whispers were replaced by honest conversation. The distance between us began to close, and I felt, more deeply than ever, that family is more than a name. It's the hearts brave enough to protect one another. Cheryl rose without a word. Her movements were deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of her own realization. She slipped from her chair, the hem of her dress whispering against the floor. The room held its breath. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final burst of anger, no tearful apology. Instead, she slipped her hand into the crook of her elbow and lifted her purse with an almost graceful resignation. In that moment, The air felt too thin for her presence. Her heels clicked softly across the hardwood, each step a punctuation in the story she chose to exit. Eyes followed her path, my son's, me, my husband's brother, each witnessing her retreat without intervention. No one called after her. No one tried to bar the door. No one needed to. She paused at the threshold, hand on the doorknob, and turned, just once. The question in her eyes was clear. Did I succeed? But there was no satisfaction left to claim, only the hollow echo of power lost. Then the door closed behind her. The click of the latch sounded final, like the closing of a chapter, and in that silence, profound and stretching, I understood how potent absence could be. I looked around the table. The chandelier light caught on empty chairs, on untouched wine glasses, on the quiet remnants of a meal that had become something else entirely. In the hush that followed her exit, every unspoken apology and every withheld defense settled like dust. No triumphant cheers, no vindictive smiles, just the stillness of a truth laid bare. Her departure spoke more than any words she might have thrown at me in anger. It was the ultimate concession. Silence became her answer, and in that silence, I reclaimed more than a seat at the table. I reclaimed my dignity, my grief, and my place in the legacy my husband built. The room exhaled with me, relieved and renewed, because sometimes the loudest victory isn't found in clamor or conflict, but in the quiet exit of those who can no longer stand against what is right. Later that night, I sat alone at the edge of our bed, the soft lamp casting a pool of light across the sheets. The legal declaration lay folded beside me, its weight now familiar, powerful, unassailable. But my trembling fingers reached instead for the smaller, crumpled note tucked beneath it. I unfolded it gently. His handwriting curved across the paper, each letter a testament to everything we lived through together. Family is not blood. It's who stays when the rest walk away. You stayed. You always did. My breath caught. The words were simple, but in their simplicity lay the deepest truth I'd ever known. I pressed the note to my lips, closing my eyes as the tears came, not of sorrow, but of relief so profound it felt like sunlight bursting through a storm cloud. I remembered the first time we met, how he'd held my hand like I was the last safe place in a chaotic world. I recalled the nights we sat in silence on this bed, sharing dreams too fragile to speak aloud. I felt the echo of his laughter here, the memory of his arms wrapped around me when fear crept in. Every moment we shared had led to this, the knowledge that no whisper, no cruel exclusion, no attempt to erase me could ever touch the bond we forged. Because family, true family, is forged in loyalty, in sacrifice, in the choice to stay when the world demands you leave. I wept then, letting the sobs shake me until there was nothing left but gratitude. Gratitude for the man who saw me, really saw me, and for the courage he gave me to stand when others tried to push me out. And as the tears subsided, I placed the note back in the envelope and held it close to my heart. In that quiet room, I promised him, and myself, that I would honor his words every day forward. Because I stayed, I always did, and now with his truth as my shield, I would never have to wonder where I belonged again. Weeks later, I found myself in the familiar warmth of my dining room, the table once again dressed in crisp linen and flickering candles. I'd baked his favorite pie, the one with the cinnamon swirl and tart apples, just as I always had, but this time I placed it at the center, where its steam curled upward like a promise, and I took the chair at the head of the table. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as my family arrived. They paused at the threshold, glancing at me with something between hesitation and hope. My son stepped forward first, offering a tentative smile. My brother-in-law followed, carrying a casserole dish, as if offering a peace offering in silver. Even Cheryl stood back for a moment, her shoulders tighter than they used to be, but her eyes softer, less guarded. I welcomed each of them with a nod, my heart steady. Gone was the edge of tension that used to cling to every celebration. Instead, there was a gentle electricity, an unspoken agreement that tonight would be different. They took their places, filling the room with the low murmur of greeting. Plates were passed, stories began to flow. My son talked about his new job and how he missed our late-night talks. My brother-in-law shared a childhood memory of my husband teaching him to fish on a summer afternoon. Even Cheryl offered a tentative anecdote about a family vacation, her voice quiet but genuine. Laughter returned like an old friend. It rippled across the table, loosening shoulders and brightening eyes. When someone reached for the pie, I served the slices with care, feeling the warmth of each grateful bite. No one questioned my seat at the head. They accepted it as naturally as they once accepted my husband's place beside me. And as they spoke, I realized this meal wasn't just a dinner, it was a reclamation. Every shared smile, every anecdote, every crumb of pie was proof that love and memory outlasted betrayal. The legacy he entrusted to me, the love, the loyalty, the very heart of our family, had found its way back into the light. When the last fork scraped the plate and candles burned low, there was no need for grand gestures or formal declarations. The way they looked at me as mother, wife, keeper of their stories, said everything. I leaned back in my chair, eyes shining with quiet triumph and gratitude. The room felt whole again, stitched together by the threads of truth he had woven into that letter and that note. Tonight I was not an outsider. I was not an afterthought. I was family, unquestioned, irreplaceable, and irrevocably home. Years passed, and the house grew quieter in some ways and fuller in others. Family photographs multiplied on the mantel. New birthdays and graduations brought laughter back to rooms once shadowed by loss. One afternoon, my granddaughter ran into my study, her small hand clutching the edge of a heavy envelope. "Grandma," she whispered, eyes wide with curiosity. "What's this?" I invited her onto my lap, and together we opened the seal he pressed so long ago. I didn't show her the legal text for its power over others, but for the truth it held, that love and loyalty are stronger than any whispered betrayal. She traced his looping script with her fingertip, and I told her, "Never let anyone decide where you belong. Belonging isn't granted, it's proven." Her arms curled around me in a fierce hug, and in that moment I felt the full circle of our story. I hadn't just fought to keep my place at the table. I had defined it, so that she and generations after her would know who they were and why they mattered. And as her small heartbeat pressed against mine, I understood that our legacy wasn't in papers or seals, but in the courage to claim our truth and the love that binds us when the rest walk away.